All right. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have you all here today for this very special part three of our learning sessions. This session is called Reimagine, Reclaim, and Redefine Healthy Communities. I'm very excited about this conversation. My name is Elmer Roldan. I'm a product of South Central Los Angeles and LA Unified. I like to throw that in there in my introduction now. My family all reside in South LA, South Central. So these topics are very near and dear to me. I am the co-host of the podcast South Central Rooted, which is produced by the South LA Building Healthy Communities Collaborative. And it is based on a recently released report that is also titled South Central Rooted. Let me tell you a little bit about it. The South Central Rooted report and podcast demonstrate how racism has shaped South Central's history and our current landscape. We released the report and podcast on May 7th, and they're both available on our website for free 99. So you got to make sure you got to go check that out. You can get it at southlaisthefuture.org. That's southlaisthefuture.org. Each lays out four key drivers of disparity. And our aim is really to expose the root causes of inequity and how it manifests today in our community of South Central Los Angeles. And there are four key drivers that we discuss. One is gentrification, displacement, and homelessness, which we know is a huge topic on top of everyone's mind. Poverty, disinvestment, and joblessness, policing, suppression, deportation, and mass incarceration. And last but not least is environmental racism. The podcast and report combines history, data, and the voices of residents and local organizers, some of our favorite organizers. You can hear them and their voices in both of these platforms, and they help us understand how Black and Brown communities on the front lines of systemic racism are the ones who are leading the way towards real, meaningful change. So the change is not coming from the outside. It's not some savior that's bringing it to us, but rather it's a grassroots-led effort. We realize that these conversations and political education tools are critically important in our current movement, we face a collective reckoning as a country with the legacy of white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And I think this is something that has deeply touched all of us and has forced every single one of us who isn't Black or Indigenous person or someone who is from a different marginalized section of the community to still understand our own privileges and to challenge them, more importantly, because we often find ourselves in conversations where we vilify the other, but we don't hold our own selves and our people accountable about how we contribute to these big topics. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're gonna do here today before we introduce the panel. In South Central, defunding police departments and the pandemic economic recovery is what is on the forefront of all conversations. But more importantly, what we wanna do is we wanna reimagine what a healthy community-based solution looks like today. We know that community advocates have long understood the connections between disinvestment, criminalization, and the destruction of community health. So today's session is going to bring together some very smart stakeholders from philanthropy, government, community organizing, and folks that just care about South Central and these topics in general to unpack how we can work together to not only reimagine, but work towards having a healthier community, especially for South Central, which is what we're talking about here today. So we're gonna do four things in this conversation today over the next 2 hours. One, we wanna understand what is happening in this current environment. We wanna reimagine a healthier South Central. We want to equip our advocates, everyone that's joining us here today, with the tools needed to have those deep, meaningful conversations with philanthropy, government, and other community organizers to advance a healthier South Central agenda. And last but not least, we want to empower our listeners to work across social networks to redefine the narrative of South Central, which for those of us who call South Central home, we know that this is a beautiful place to live where we coexist and and we we appreciate all the benefits of being in these communities. But for folks who aren't from these neighborhoods, often they walk away with a very negative perception of who we are as a community and people. So without further ado, I want to introduce our wonderful panelists here today. First of all, thank you to the three of you for joining us. I'm going to start by introducing Eunices Hernandez, who is a policy advocate and campaign strategist working with local and state legislators in communities that are most devastated by the war on drugs and mass incarceration. Another huge topic that many people are talking about today. Eunices is a native of Los Angeles and a daughter of immigrants. She has loved ones with mental health needs and substance abuse disorders. So she knows the detrimental impacts that criminalization has, not only on immigrant communities, but communities of color in general. Most recently, she has been the leader in the Justice LA jail fight that stopped the $3.5 billion jail plan in Los Angeles County. Woohoo! Thank you for that. Eunices was recently appointed as a voting member of the Los Angeles County Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group and co-chair of the Community-Based System of Care Ad Hoc Committee. Wow, that's a mouthful. I hope you practiced that lately so you're able to repeat it off the top of your head. Next, I want to introduce Faisal Roble, who is the Chief Equity Officer for the Planning Department of the City of Los Angeles. Before he was appointed to this position, he served as the principal city planner for the West and Coastal and South Los Angeles region. In the past, Faisal has managed the 3 South Los Angeles community plans, as well as designing the fast food ordinance, which served as a foundation for the health chapter in the general plan of the city of Los Angeles. Faisal has over 30 years experience in planning and urban design. Thank you for being here. And last and definitely not least, Marta Dina Arguello, who is a veteran who for 40 years has worked in Los Angeles around environmental, health, and social justice issues. She joined the Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles in 1998 to launch the environmental health programs, then became its executive director in November of 2007. As a coalition builder, she has emphasized the need for local grassroots advocacy, working in partnership with statewide policy actions. She's an active board member of numerous organizations, including Californians for Pesticide Reform and Californians for a Healthy and Green Economy. Marta was appointed to the California Air Resources Board Global Warming Environmental Justice Advisory Committee and 617 Implementation Working Group. She's the co-chair of Standing Together Against Neighborhood Drilling and co-created the LA Leap Coalition working to address climate justice in the city of Los Angeles. So we have some really important people with us here today, experts in these topics, and we're gonna jump right in. And the way that we're gonna break up this conversation really is gonna be into 3 sections. The first section is gonna talk about reimagining South Los Angeles. Then we're gonna talk about reclaiming South Los Angeles. And then we're gonna redefine healthy communities. So we're gonna jump right into our topic of conversation. And why don't we start with the very basic conversation for each and every single one of you. How would you define a healthy community? And I'm gonna toss it to Eunices to be the first one to tell us how you define a healthy community.
How I define a healthy community and how I envision it and what we fight for, every day is a community where, our most vulnerable people have direct access to the services that are going to help them thrive in our communities, right? So that's like 24-hour access to healthcare services, mental health services, behavioral health services. And also when we call 911 for the responses to be life affirming. So, making sure that if it's like for crisis response or people who are suffering from harm, that it's like doctors or psychiatric mobile response teams that respond that actually affirm people's lives instead of come weaponized. And so also like housing for everybody. We're a first world country and in LA County, our houselessness, population is increasing every single time they count. and that shouldn't surprise us. It's because of, you know, the unsustainable living prices. And so it would also be like just housing folks, because housing first then helps us allow to address any other underlying issues. That's what I imagine, a place where everybody has to go, like, can go home and sleep, an opportunity for people to have purpose, whether that's through job or volunteering or just meeting with people that they connect with, and also access to the basic healthcare services at not a cost, so people can get it. I don't know how that sounds, but that's really, you know, what is going to help our community thrive.
Sounds great to me. Faisal, we're going to go to you next.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for this great question that I think is probably at the heart of what's wrong with our society. In a sense, a healthy community for people of color and for Black Americans should be one that moves away from the description that Dr. Dubois, W.B. Dubois, described in 1921, where he said that the Black man is reduced to be two persons in one body, one that's very American and one that's the least American. And at the time, I think most people didn't understand what the doctor meant, but what he meant was that he was longing for a day when the African American and any other person of color in America enjoys the same, what you call, critical assets that other, you know, whites and people of Anglo-Saxon heritage in America enjoy. And that includes or drives me to the crux of your question, a healthy community that somebody in West LA, in Westwood, enjoys. And what is that healthy community? That healthy community is a community where job access is guaranteed, not hustled, not worried about, but guaranteed to a point where you can either do a quick drive or within your walking distance. And quality housing, where a person has a decent house, his kids are not worried at the end of the night when they sleep about mice, about cockroaches, about leakages, and about lead-induced type of water. It's also, healthy community is a community where people are not being bombarded by what South Central activists long time ago called clusters of nuisance uses. That's a liquor store faced or cornered by another laundromat, by a motel, cheap motel, and by a halfway home, where all these three nuisance uses are clustered to feed each other. You collect changes from the recycling center, you buy the liquor next door, you go to the motel, and you probably do some of the things that my sister mentioned, which is avail yourself to the proliferation of drugs in the community. Lastly, I think a sustainable community is a place where people have abundant access to all forms of healthcare, so that when COVID-19 hits us like it did, it didn't hit us in an unproportional way. Because by the time COVID-19 hit us, we were living in an unhealthy community for so long that the disparity between Culver City or Glendale and South LA and Inglewood is so stark that you think they live in two different countries, one third world and another non-third world. In a sense, we created through zoning, and I will indict my own profession, we created through zoning through the last 150 years, two separate but unequal geographies, one the west side of the valley and one south central LA. And I think we don't have a healthy community, and we are aspiring to get a healthy community. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And we're definitely going to get into that topic of conversation as the webinar progresses. But I want to ask Martha to tell us how you would define a healthy community in your profession.
Well, I tend to not separate health from justice. So a healthy community is one where people's humanity is respected and there is justice that is equitable. I want with that. And then I think, you know, for us, you know, the air, water, and soil is fundamental. right? That it is what sustains our life in fundamental ways. And so a healthy community has to have clean water, clean soil, and clean air. 3 things that South LA does not necessarily have. I think, you know, universal access to healthcare, a medical home is critical. An economic system that is actually not extractive and builds community wealth and generational wealth for the people who live there. Adequate green space provides folks from the stress relief of, you know, we all know right now, like just looking at a tree makes us feel a little bit better. So I think broadly, those things make a healthy community, but also the type of public policy that we have can either support or actually be a detriment to people's health. So when we have public policies that are punitive, that are based in this concept that you are the undeserving poor, and it's racialized, then we have a recipe for the opposite of creating healthy communities. So justice, equal access, healthcare, strong economic development, all of those things go into making communities healthier. I would say, I would be remiss if I didn't say, you know, certainly not having oil wells and fossil fuel production in your community is something that contributes to creating an unhealthy community. There's a lot of other things, but we don't have time to list all the things.
A lot of things. That's right. Before we move on with our questions, I just want to remind our participants that you can throw in your own questions in the Q&A box. So feel free to add them at any time, and our team will either answer them live, or we'll do our best to send you a response. So don't be shy. Feel free to throw in your questions there. So Eunices, I'm going to bring it back to you and ask you to tell us about Reform LA.
Great. So I think folks are talking about Justice LA, the coalition that stopped the jail plan.
Yes.
Is that okay? Great. So thank you, and thank you for allowing me to join y'all powerhouses that have been really transforming the work on the ground in South LA. I'm in Northeast LA. I'm not directly impacted, but I've seen the impact of not having a healthy community and how that impacts like generational wise. So just thank you for all you've done. So Justice LA is a coalition of dozens of organizations that are doing work both at the national level, state level, but really focused at the county level. Our main goal was to, stop LA County's jail expansion plan, reclaim those dollars that were going to be going to building out new jails and reimagining how we could use those to build out an alternative system of care, an alternative system, system of alternative to incarceration. So Justice LA last year, I'm not sure if you all know, but we did stop the LA County jail plan. That was about going to be $3.5 billion to build a jail for women, and all the way up in Lancaster, which is over 50 miles away from City Central. And it would build a new jail where Men's Central Jail currently stands that would be for just people who have behavioral health needs. Right now in LA County, the jail population is about 13,000. Prior to COVID-19, so in February, it was at 17,000 every single day. 5,000 of those people have been identified through a report by the RAND group that say these 5,000 people who are in jail could actually be better served in the community. I'll let you know to this date, all of those folks, most of those folks are still in there, which means if we invested in alternative to incarceration, we can get them out. But so we stopped the jail plan. We now, since last year, working up all the way till March, we worked with the county to develop a report called the Care First Jails Last Report. In this report, it's over 115 recommendations about the alternatives, about different ways people can be served in the community, different ways that they won't end up in the jails and the ERs or have contact with law enforcement. And so now Justice LA is working on reimagining those dollars. So we stopped the jail plan, we developed a plan of recommendations of alternatives to incarceration, and now we're fighting for actually getting the funds to, fund the alternatives to incarceration. So reclaiming and reimagining those dollars. That's our goal. And we do, just to add a last piece to this, is our coalition targeted the jail plan through different routes. So a huge focus of ours is pretrial reform. A huge focus of ours is building out the alternatives to incarceration, and also trying to figure out how we don't let the jail population increase again. But that's what we focus on, just really trying to move those dollars and stop the incarceration of our people.
And what does it look like for you to monitor that money and ensure that the county does right by its promise to invest that money where it's going to help people?
So we do a lot of budget advocacy, right? So a lot of the money that the LA County gets is state money, so we monitor that. But it really is about focusing on actual line items around making sure that the money gets there. It's the budget advocacy cycle in LA County is not like from January to December. It's really complicated. So you have to figure out the pinpoints of when you can actually advocate to the BOS to move these dollars. So earlier this year, we pushed the board in July to create an alternatives to incarceration fund. We've also pushed them to move money into the alternatives to incarceration, but that hasn't happened. And so our next phase is at the end of September. There's what's called the supplemental budget phase. And so that's going to be the point where I believe that they're going to move $50 million into ATI funding. And so the budget piece is really two, is one, the relationships that you develop with the board offices, but two, it's also having to learn how to be like savvy around the actual budgets and documents, because that's really what all the information is. It's public. And so that's the way we've attempted to go about it. And we're also, there's a measure on the ballot called Measure J that would also move a big chunk of money into alternatives to incarceration and reinvestment. And we could talk about that later, but it's just different avenues to get the same money and making sure that you can attend those BOS meetings.
Got it. And BOS stands for?
Board of Supervisors of LA County.
Board of Supervisors of LA County. Big, powerful group of 5. All right, Faisal, I'm gonna move to you. If you can educate us all on the purpose of the LA City Planning Department and what its role is in building healthy communities. And then if you can tell us a little bit about your role as the Chief Equity Officer.
Yes, thank you. So I will start with the last part of your question, with the mayor's directive, executive directive number 27, issued in June 19, I believe, or 16. He committed the city to having and addressing issues of diversity and racial justice and equity. And with that, he instructed every general manager to appoint a person for that office and then give the resources. That portion of the commitment is yet to come. And then, so I was tapped in to run that office, and we submitted our first action plan to the mayor's office as of September 11th. And there are 3 components in the racial justice and equity action plan. One is about employees, how to open up doors for people of color, not only at the entry level, but at the management upper mobility. I don't know if you know, but some of the departments in the city, particularly the planning department, had some structural racism built in when it comes to upper mobility. Just FYI, I'm the first Black, or even for that matter, person of color to ever make the position I am, which is the principal city planner, and that all came by merit. Taking exams, in which case most of the time you have to be very high. In terms of from there on, it's appointment, or the director appoints, or the mayoral, and it didn't happen yet. So we will work at 3 components: the personnel element, department operations, and services. And services is the part where we interface with the public and neighborhoods and communities. What services does the planning department provide to the community and to the city? And there is the issue that you guys are interested. The Department of Planning is authorized by the LA Municipal Court to draft what is akin to, or what amounts to, the constitution of the city, the land use framework of the city. Every other department that you see, including safety, public works, should come underneath that, and then they, branch out of that. The planning department is supposed to be implementing the land use element of the city, which includes circulation, housing, safety element, open space, and parks, and what have you. In the last 100 years, we have been doing planning in the city of Los Angeles. We updated community plans to give people a long-term vision of how they like their community to be developing. And then we have short-term implementation programs and administrative code that also implements. I think where we lagged behind is really to implement good community-oriented as well as community-generated or co-generated community plan is in some of the neighborhoods. So some of the things that we have done didn't work well for some neighborhoods. It worked well for others. And I think there has been a discussion in the city for some years now to really make our plan is more of interactive and also more bottom-up kind of thing where the communities that we are planning for have a significant say in terms of the issues and the opportunities that the plan discovers, issues in terms of what plagues these communities, what are the problems, because Brentwood may not have the same problem as South Central LA as you probably imagine. But if we just use the same tools that we use for Brentwood, which in my opinion has worked for so far, given how they look, but didn't work for South Central or East LA, it's about time that we come back and say what type of tool is fit for South Central LA, in which case the players should also come from there. If you have hearings are a big part of the planning department's day-to-day work. When we have a hearing, say in some affluent neighborhood, you have 10 lawyers, 20 doctors, 20 police, residents who all come and pressure the decision maker and sometimes change the way things do. In South Central or East LA, we don't have that pressure. So the question is, did we neglect them and excluded them, or they self-excluded? And I think there is enough literature to argue that it is our mistake and it's us who excluded people of color to be participants of their own neighborhood design. And we need to have that conversation with you guys. And part of the plan that I submitted to the mayor's office is to put heavy emphasis on working with non-profit groups or community-based organizations such as yours to collaborate and co-plan with us as we go into identifying the issues as well as working on the opportunities. For instance, job opportunities are a big thing in South Central LA. I think we need to work around the issue of what does the Alameda corridor mean to South Central LA, except to contribute to bad environment. But it accommodates billions and billions of dollars from the airport until it gets out of Central South LA to go to other parts of the country. It's the largest port in the world that also handles probably 45%, if not more, of what comes in and out of the United States. And how many people benefit from that, except inhaling bad environment along that corridor? None. The same thing with the LAX. It's still within the greater South LA, if you include demographically part of greater South Central. It's one of the largest job generating entities in the world. And how many of us benefit at all levels, or people from South LA, that also can be studied. So I think we write plans, but did we write plans in a way that it reflects the needs and opportunities of the residents of these communities? I think the jury probably would say no. And that's where the mayor's action plan enhances the role of community-based organizations such as yours to partake the process and help us in working on the plans as we go into the future.
Thank you for that. It's refreshing to hear a government representative talk about how the government takes responsibility for not fully engaging residents. Us in South LA get blamed for the conditions that are often the responsibility of the state, and so I think it's a good place to start the conversation from. So I'm gonna go to Martha, and I'd love for you to talk about environmental racism, specifically what it is, and then how does it intersect with the big topics that we're talking about today: poverty and homelessness and policing and everything else that we know is affecting people's lives today.
Okay. So I'm actually showing on my screen a map that we had produced using CalEnviroScreen. And environmental justice advocates have been fighting for environmental justice in California for many, many years. And we fought to create a tool that would give us a sense of, we kept telling agencies, look, the way you regulate and the way you permit and the way you allow polluting industries to thrive in our communities is problematic, is that you look at a facility as if it's only the only facility. And our communities face a number of cumulative and synergistic impacts. And by cumulative impacts, I mean, you are near a freeway, you are next to a refinery, or let's say South LA. You're near the freeways, you're less than 2,500 feet from an oil well. There's an auto body shop and a metal dismantler, all within 500 feet of where you live. Yet each of those are regulated separately and as if one doesn't impact the other. And so a major breakthrough in terms of policy was this idea of measuring cumulative impacts. So CalEnviroScreen takes 19 measures of community vulnerability, including impaired water bodies, a Superfund Society Index, and a number of health outcomes, not enough health outcomes. But it tells us, so the darker the color red, the more vulnerable that community is. And this includes access to healthcare, linguistic isolation, and it was a big fight in California to actually, and they excluded race. So this does not include race, but it does include these other 19 measures of vulnerability, including, I believe, respiratory disease and cardiovascular. So, and then the dots that you see are COVID cases. So the bigger the dot, the more COVID cases. So this for us shows both environmental racism and how health disparities become synergistic and cumulative, is that we've created vulnerable communities. Poverty is one of them, you know, housing instability, housing quality, all of those things that we know are happening in our communities. And that's a picture of it. But what it is that there is, we are, what often Jan Robinson Flint says, and I quote her, we are overexposed to pollution and underprotected from laws and regulations. And I will also quote Naomi Klein, who talks about our communities being sacrifice zones. And so, you know, everything from redlining to where we were allowed to live, what gets co-located, all of those are how environmental racism plays out. And when I first started doing this work, I would go to meetings and regulators as well as industry representatives would say, you're not being made sick because of these facilities. It's because you drink and you smoke and you're not healthy. And we're like, no, I think it's the refinery. I think it's the oil wells. I think it's that chemical plant that are putting up these emissions. And when you look at patterns of disease near them, you know, we find the same thing, right? We find people living near oil wells, headaches, bloody noses, nausea. We don't know, cancer is harder to figure out because it's a long-term disease, but this is what it looks like. So environmental racism, it looks like health inequality that has been produced by our built environment. And we know that in California, it is, you know, Black, Indigenous, Latino communities who are more likely to live in highly contaminated areas. And so it goes into making, you know, why someone in Brentwood lives 17 years more than someone in Watts. So that tagline from the California Endowment that your zip code should not determine your life expectancy is essentially an indicator of how our communities, somebody decided it's just okay to put that contaminated stuff there. You know, we're going to sacrifice your health on the altar of somebody else's economic growth. I think there was a second part of the question, but I can't remember.
Just you answered it very well. So I want to pause and ask everyone to reflect on this moment that we're living in, both in a moment when the pandemic is affecting everyone, but also we are living through a racial justice movement uprising. And they both serve as a catalyst to reimagine and redefine what a healthy South Central could look like. So my question to you is, who are, what are the stories or the voices that are essential in helping us reimagine our future? Like, who should be driving this narrative? And I'm going to start with Faisal. If you could tell us what your perspective is on this.
Yes. So the Atlantic magazine has been tracking this inflection period and how the nation is reacting. And I think one of the memorable phrases that I did catch from that series is that from the day George Floyd was killed up to today, over 24 million Americans marched the streets of America. Never happened with that within a short period of time. So one of the authors were comparing this period, one of the most significant periods in American history, if we don't waste. And it seems like there's a volcano that has, erupted when it comes to racial justice. And the beauty is that in the past, when people like Dr. Dubois were writing in the 1920s, it was the black man, even black woman was not included at the time. It was the black man alone who was fighting. Today, it's a rainbow of people who are really trying to assert and reclaim their rights. And with that context, I think a healthy South Central LA should be measured with several matrices. One of the matrices should be the role its residents play. As I earlier said, planning and land use, which is, by the way, one of the most powerful domain that the city has control. So the city doesn't control education. The city doesn't control, if you will, highway patrol. The city control is how we use our land within the city jurisdiction, and everything else, including the police station, is how to build the police station. So I think the way the residents of the city are allowed to play a role in restructuring the way the city looks, both from budget planning as well as other aspects of our life, open space, environmental justice, housing, transit-oriented, gentrification and displacement. All those are talked through the years, but they are talked either in academic circles or in boardrooms where the residents who are subject of the negative impact are not there. I think if the city, under the current mayor who has done some good work so far, is about to show some tangible, everlasting impact in this area, I think we need to see residents of this impacted neighborhoods on the driver's seat. And Martha's presentation literally jives with what I'm saying, in the sense that it looks like we plan land use divorced from some of the mega environmental projects, because the environmental projects that the planning department usually looks at is the miniature of what a building causes in terms of environment. Most often, we completely negate when there is an oil well next to a project where you're going to house 300 young children and families, because we say that oil well is permit belongs to the state or the county and what have you. I think there has to be a movement to bring these jurisdictions, the city, the county, and the state, in terms of how they act on land use, environmental issues, and police, which is the part of the racial justice. I think healthy LA cannot be created by one department. Planning alone cannot be created. Even if we give buildings that are beautiful and well-designed, they will still remain buildings if the police is coming and killing people inside their houses. The same would be with the environmental, or if there is no public policy that really talks openly and honestly about the drug use. Who is bringing the drugs? Is this the young Latino, Latinx, or Black person who is standing on the corner, or somebody who is rich with probably smoking cigar in Brentwood and Bel Air, Beverly Crest. All these are documented. So I think the conversation that the city and leaders are having along these issues in terms of people of color should be very authentic and touchy and go to the source of the issue and then reorganize and bring everybody on the plate so that we can act in unison.
Martha, why don't you tell us your perspective on this? What voices do you think should be leading the charge in this moment?
Well, I believe our voices should, and I think that the movement moment allows us to demand things that we haven't been able to win before, and we should be bold in our demands. And key to that demand is deep democracy and community engagement, control over the budget, right? We should be doing participatory budgeting, and we should be at that table deciding what goes where, so that we are, first stopping the harm, and then figuring out how to restore that, whether that's around criminalization, whether it's, trauma-informed education and care, so that we in our communities, like the rest of this country, does not feel it has to numb itself to be in this world, right? Even how we view drugs and drug addiction, if we view it through trauma-informed care, if we have it informed by what it means to be, what does it mean to be an indigenous person here, when we have taken their land and we have erased them. And in South LA, the large concentration of indigenous folks from this country as well as from Mexico. If they are not at the table bringing that traditional knowledge, then the family's not at the table and we shouldn't be planning. If our organizations from South LA are not at the table, then we can't sit down and have dinner and figure out who's going to get what. So I think, and we also as organizations have to reevaluate the way we work. We can't, not widgets. Social change and revolution is not a widget. And we're often bound by some very narrow mission. But what we all have to remember is that we are building power so that they cannot say no. And that's what this moment gives us. And pushing planning departments, pushing the city. There is, the work that happens in silos is one of the biggest problems. So there's left hand, right hand is never talking to each other at the city. And so, we've just created the first ever climate emergency department that has a Frontline Communities Commission, which is about putting frontline communities, those most impacted, those of us who have been forced to live in sacrifice zones, are at the table making the decisions as much as possible. And also, how do we give space for folks like Faisal and others who want to change from within, and how do we support them so that they also have the power to move that bureaucracy from within?
Thank you. And Oni says, I'm going to throw it to you. Who are the voices that you think should be in the charge?
Well, I think the people who have been most directly impacted by the harm need to be at the charge. But not only that, not in a tokenizing way, because what we've seen in the CJ movement is it started as that. And really it's about how do we invest in these folks who have been harmed? How do we invest in their healing? How do we invest in their leadership so that they can actually make strategic moves and be able to voice, their opinions in spaces that are of the bureaucracy? The only reason why the Alternatives to Incarceration Care First report was so good, and it really sets the golden standard for what the country should do around alternatives to incarceration, is because people who were directly impacted were at the county table and writing those recommendations with the county themselves. That's the only reason why that report is so impactful. And so I would say that at every level, and we should even look at the numbers and highlight that. There's a couple of fact sheet links that were added in, but if you look at the people who are most impacted in our LA County jail system, it's women, Black women, and predominantly from South LA. 2 zip codes in South LA make up the largest jail populations in the women's jail. Now, for young people who are getting, in contact with the system, it's happening through the Los Angeles School Police, and there's a fact sheet about that as well. And when you look at it, it's 3 zip codes from South LA that are making up most of the arrests that are coming from the Los Angeles School Police. And a big chunk of folks are Black children. So when we look at like who should be at the helm of this, it's people directly impacted, Black women, Black children, because they are also criminalized and also harmed by what's happening. And so it's important that we hear from that perspective. But not only should we burden our side to do that, like we have to continue to fight the bureaucracy to open up the table so people can participate. Because most often than not, these meetings are happening when people are working, when they can't attend. Luckily, I mean, under COVID-19, there's been more online access, which is better. But traditionally, like these are the folks that are kept out of these spaces. So our job is also to make sure that we push the system to open up the tables so that people directly impacted can have a voice and have a say on how policies are made, what policies are made, and making sure that, you know, we don't leave anybody behind. But I put up the ATI report as an example of what real democratic community access to policymaking and at a legislative level looks like. And in this time, it's in LA County.
I'm going to ask Faisal about investing in healthy communities, and specifically if you can share examples of the city of Los Angeles investing in one part of the city where you see the impact and you feel it versus other areas where they've neglected to invest, and what should be the role of the city planning department in this time period that we're going through right now.
Yeah, so in general, the city planning department doesn't control any of the economies of the city. It's not like Department of Water and Power or LAX or what have you. But we process projects, mega projects, and basically private properties are developed and private owners come to the city with application and do whatever they want. But I think there has not been a thinking around what the city's role is when there is development concentrating in one part of the city and not the other. And that's why I said that right under our watch, we created the same way we did with the education before the Brown versus Board of Education. Really, there should be something planning versus something. We, under our watch, we created two cities that are completely unequal. And this is not by accident. And basically, the most endearing concept in zoning, which we could have used if we wanted, is the origin of the zoning, which went to the Supreme Court in 1870s, that created some concept called that was under Euclid versus a realtor. It went to the Supreme Court at the time. And basically it was the city having the authority to regulate separation of uses and over-concentration of certain uses. I'm driving to a point where I'm saying the city could have really changed some of the over-concentration of certain uses that South LA or East LA is hungry for. For instance, the establishment of groceries. The West Side is flooded with groceries. Sometimes you can walk half a mile and you see 4 or 5 different groceries all competing whereas in South LA you have to walk miles and miles, if even not even more than that. And we learned that there is a location theory that groceries follow. Their headquarters of all places in Idaho. So what they do is they have big geographies. So South LA would be lumped together with as far as Huntington Beach and Newport Beach. And the Idaho corporate officer, as long as he puts his groceries in Huntington Park, Huntington Beach, or Newport Beach, which is in the same geography at South Central LA, they satisfied their business model. So the city should have said, the same way we say with overconcentration of liquor stores or gun shops, they could have said that good uses cannot also concentrate themselves in one geography. So they could have said, Westwood can only have given its population of 30,000 people one grocery, where South LA is 400 million. The geography of the so-called South Central geography is the same size as San Francisco, probably no more than 5 groceries. So the city could have used some of the tools that are embedded in the zoning knowledge, but willy-nilly we chose not to pressure the capital owning class and say, do whatever you want. You have a free hand. So if you believe that the resident in Westwood is willing to buy as much as they want and they have the cash, we don't care whether you put it in South LA or in Westwood, just do your own. My point is, the same way we are doing with affordable housing now, and maybe it will produce sometime in the future some good results. We could have done the same thing for each and every use, including clinics, dental offices, all these neighborhood amenities that create healthy, integrated, dynamic communities. We could have managed as a city, but we chose to look that way.
Got it. I do want to ask one follow-up question to this, because if your department doesn't direct that, is this a matter of us putting pressure on the mayor, on city council members to engage businesses to bring more investment? And with that, if you can also include the role that community-based organizations can play in effectively engaging this planning process. And that part of the question comes directly from our friend Roger Perez, who added that.
Well, yeah. So we touched a little bit, who can work with the community, who has the interest of the community at heart. All those are issues really we can talk in the future. But I think nobody can argue against the concept that says the community should be on the driver's seat or co-driver in this journey. Martha talked about, Eunice talked about in terms of the significance of people who are being impacted, the people who are the subjects of the discussion, to be not subjects anymore, but really objects. They have to be there. And, there is that discussion everywhere, in the mayor's office, in the planning office, in my office, to say that, 56 years we have been doing, some people would think they were doing this unintentionally, to their best, but the result is the judge. We have, very negative results. So as Albert Einstein said, you cannot just repeat the same thing by getting the same wrong result, on and on, again. I think it's about time to say that we need to change the model. The mayor needs to change the model by instructing general managers to say, I want a different direction. I think general managers need to direct people like me to say, we want a different direction and different model of planning for the societies. And part of that planning including several key elements, in my opinion. One of which is residents to be around the chair, not watering it down the way we watered down the 2000 charter reform, which created neighborhood councils, but very genuine, conscious, race-conscious effort coming from people of color to really finally be on the driver's seat, because nobody can change, as you said, their situation without the person changing to be at the driver's seat. So I think the discussion is there. Yes, you guys need to be pressuring people who make decisions to change the direction, and they expect that to happen. And maybe there is a climate today, more than any time in our lifetime, all of us, where this atonement and inflection period is there, so we don't have to miss it.
Thank you for that. We're going to move on to the redefining part of our conversation, and specifically looking at how current definitions or language that we're using about community health and equity are inadequate. So what are we learning about our own assumptions and how we can incorporate them into the new narrative? Our friend Mary Lee spoke in a previous webinar about the importance of follow through with policies, because racism will inevitably sneak into the implementation, and a great idea may be derailed by the people who are responsible for carrying it through, whether it's an administrative side or policymakers or advocates. And so what I want to shift to is asking each and every one of you questions about what is happening right now that allows us to tap into that narrative. So Eunices, I'm going to start with you, because we're currently in an election season, right? Not only for the highest seat in the country, the highest seat in office with the president, but also local governments, right? There's city council elections, school board elections, and others that are going to impact us on a daily basis. So what is coming up in November that we should be paying attention to that is directly impacting South Central LA? Or what are other initiatives that are on the ballot that you think people should be particularly mindful of before checking off that ballot box? I was gonna say before going to vote, but I know most of us are gonna be doing it by mail this year. So that question to you, Eunice, if you could tell us.
Great. Yes. So I'm speaking as the executive director of La Defensa C4 right now. And I have a different hat, which is the co-chair of the Measure J campaign. So I'll tell you all the list of propositions that I think that you should just look into that I think would be either critically impactful to South LA or detrimental. But I'm not going to say which. You'll have to do that research on your own for lobbying reasons and other laws that I'm still figuring out, but just want to be on the safe side. So Prop 17, if you look at that, it would reinstate the ability for people who are on parole to vote. So you can do more research on that. Prop 20 does a lot of things, including rolling back some reforms that have happened in the last several years, and would also create the ability for your DNA to be collected for misdemeanors. Another measure I think y'all should look at is Prop 25, and that one you should read very carefully. Prop 25, the title says it would replace cash bail with a system of risk assessments, larger probation departments, and more judicial power. And then the last one is Measure J. And I bring the other ones up because they're CJ related. And like I had mentioned before, like the people who are directly impacted at disproportionate rates, like it would blow your mind if you saw the numbers, is, Black people, brown folks, and indigenous folks, and people who don't have employment, especially in South LA. Like there was a research link that I also put in there that highlights a lot of the arrests coming out of the LAPD. Most of them are from 4 zip codes in South LA. So just wanting to lift that up. But can you ask me that last piece of your question? I'm sorry. Once I started getting to that data, I get passionate.
What is coming up on the ballot that we should be mindful of?
Okay, great. Thank you. And so I pretty much said most of Measure J. Measure J would move 10% of money that is located in a fund where our tax dollars that are locally generated are put in. That bucket is about $8 billion. So Measure J would move 10% of that money into community reinvestment, such as jobs, youth programs, and housing. And it would invest in a second bucket, which is the alternatives to incarceration bucket. So pretrial services, jobs and training, and also housing. There's more info that you can look up on reimagine.la for Measure J, but when we look at the landscape that we're in, you're seeing folks, especially Black community members, getting killed on TV at what it feels like every week, right? And then you also have, brown, Black, and indigenous communities dying at disproportionate rates of COVID-19. When you layer those things up, you can see it's that the communities that we have least invested in that are getting the most hurt by these systems, by this pandemic. And so and you also have the administration at the federal level. I think if you have the ability to vote, your vote will literally save lives. If we think about like who's been harmed since 2016, but also locally, there's the LA County Board of Supervisor race that you should really look into. Those 5 people, like Elmer, you said, are extremely powerful. Each of them represents 2 million people. And so a County Board of Supervisors race is critically important. And when we think about the impacts of policy making, when you think about the impacts of decision makers, the legislators, no more can it be felt almost instantaneously than at the county and city level. Like for the state, you got to wait for the law to get implemented, right? But literally at the local and city level, once the policy passes their motion, like you can almost feel it, in the next few months. So yeah, look at that, and just please vote, register to vote. There's less than 30 days for people to get ballots in the mail. People should receive those ballots by October 5th. Please send that in. And then there's less than 50 days now, or closer to 40 for the actual November 3rd. So just look on those ballots and please vote. And please, if you know people that don't vote because they just don't, then do something to get them to vote. You know, our lives literally depend on it. Our fiscal sustainability depends on it. And our literal physical health depends on it as well. So just make sure you vote.
Very important district attorney race, highly contentious, big fight. So make sure you pay attention to that. That one definitely impacts our communities. Marta, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you just what are the key takeaways from South Central Rooted and the report that advocates put together, and you know, how can advocates utilize this in advancing systemic change? What should they look for in the report?
Well, I think the report around the principles that are in the report, but the information. And then the other thing is that we actually have to work on these things together, right? And we were, you know, developing the concepts around the 4 drivers. We knew that my organization is traditionally an environmental health organization, but I need to show up for issues around incarceration. I need to show up for issues around access to healthcare, so that we're actually building the boots on the ground that we need to win, because we don't, unless, not only do we need to win the policy, but then we have to double down and actually fight for the right implementation. So I think that the main lesson is that we need to address all these drivers together, and we have to, because they're all sort of related to, the extractive economy and to racism. And so we have to address that. And then I think the other part is, you know, getting involved with the organizations. I mean, you know, this is the choir that's here, right? The attendees are the choir, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking to each other and really learning how to sing. So versus making a cacophony of noise, right? We're all singing the same song, making the same demands, and we all should be demanding control over the budget. Whatever issue you work on, we who are most impacted and who've borne the brunt of bad policy decisions in our communities need to fight and know that budget, even though it's hard to understand and it's complex. And then we all get together, right? Inicius may know the policing budget. I may know the environmental budget. Somebody else may know the planner's budget. And we need to figure all that out, so that as we fight for that budget to reflect our values and to actually begin to stop the harm, repair the harm, and restore our communities, we don't do that. We can't do that unless we push beyond what we normally do as nonprofit organizations. And the budget to me is, you know, show me what you spend your money on, and I'll show you, you know, it tells me what you value. And the city of Los Angeles is not spending it on achieving justice for us. And that's the fight. And vote. And volunteer in other states.
That's right. I'm going to ask you all a question about the way that the pandemic has elevated the need for equity, and what conversations should we be having? Like what is the most important thing that we should be elevating as we think about the way that the pandemic is further exacerbating the disparities that our communities are facing? So I'm going to start with you, Faisal. If you could tell us just, what's the one topic that should constantly be brought up, especially as we engage in city planning?
Yeah. So as planners, we believe that there's a correlation between health and built environment or land use, especially in the case of South Central, East LA, and communities of color. As we talked about, the absence of groceries that dispense fresh fruits and vegetables, the lack of access to health establishments, medical establishments, the entire environment. There were vast wastelands along our corridors, as opposed to being in neighborhood amenities where you can walk, into a nice grocery or a clinic or a piazza or a plaza, what have you. So I think if anything could come out of this exercise and atonement period for the city and for the nation, we always wrote beautiful plans and languages that, you know, are probably the same for South LA and Westwood and what have you, but it is the implementation level that we failed. So what you earlier said in relation to what your other panelists said this morning, equity and how to follow up, and that's where we failed. Because really, if you look at the community plans that we have, South LA's community plan is as rich as that in Westwood or what have you, but there have not been enough implementation plans for South LA and South Central and East LA, number one. Number two, the plans that we wrote in the past didn't have equity language, whereas in the case of some neighborhoods, equity is taken care of by the capitalist economy without, you know, the government interference. So what we need to do is to build equity infrastructure into the plans and come up with something that can regulate some of the things that we like to do. So as part of my program, if I get the resources and what have you, and we haven't still identified any resource whatsoever, we like to come up not only with a plan that we have, but also with a toolbox and what we call equity checklist. Some cities have been successful in having equity not equity checklist, sustainability checklist, or the green building checklist, where you don't give a permit to a building if they don't meet 20 criteria that all speak to green building or sustainability. I think if we come up with an equity checklist that has 20 tough points that is, does this project or does the city program meet this 20 equity checklist, we will not permit or it will not speak to the interest. So I think I agree with Mary Lee what she said, the follow-up, but as a planner, we know how to take, you know, resolutions or general discussion like this and convert that into a code. When you codify, you can implement. So that equity checklist should be our target, to really see equity plans and equity conversation being part and parcel of what we'll be doing.
Got it. Marta, so I'm gonna ask you the same question. What are the conversations that we need to be having about equity right now?
Well, I would rather have a conversation about achieving justice, because I'm not sure what equity means. I think once, it's like our movement, right? We started talking about environmental racism, and then it got sanitized to environmental justice. And then it got reduced to formative and performative ways of engaging communities that checks off a list. So I think that we just have to stand hard that that's not good enough anymore. And then kind of lost my train of thought, because I actually want to ask Faisal a question. You know, before there was this equity checklist, there was a green zones policy that the environmental justice community and many spent years and years working on. And that policy was to actually achieve environmental justice for people. It meant that communities in Pacoima who have an overconcentration of auto body shops would actually finally have a legal tool to say, no mas, no more here, right? Because we don't have that tool. But yet that hasn't moved. And in fact, because of who was in power in South LA was specifically excluded from having a green zones policy. So sometimes I think we don't need to create new things. We actually have to implement the things that our communities have fought hard for and got ignored. So I think that's one thing we have to do. And I'll stop there, because it would be, yeah.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I'm aware of that. You know, Pacoima Group is created environmental justice checklist. You cannot implement those kind of things at the city level until and unless you put it into the municipal code. Because when somebody comes for a project, that project works through the entire city government departments, from planning to building and safety to police to fire to sanitation, public works, water and power, and each and everyone gives some sort of permit, but you want to stop those permits unless they satisfy this checklist. And the way you do to have that checklist being implemented is by codifying it, so that when a project comes and an engineer at the building and safety department is flipping your plans, they need to put that into their computer, and that red flag will pop up and say, there is an environmental justice checklist. Can you compare this project to that? And then literally they open up those plans and go block by block, drawing by drawing, and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. But if we write a 2,000 page, which is what a lot of well-wishing nonprofit groups do, if you write a 2,000 page beautiful treatise of environmental justice and what have you, and it's not codified in the code, it will, and we have a lot of programs, even within the planning department, we have general plans that are beautiful, but until and unless they are codified, they cannot be implemented throughout the city department. So when we do this equity checklist, I would like to collaborate with you guys and with the issues that you have already discussed. So our job at this point in time would be not to revisit and spend another 4 years on those issues, but take those issues, have discussions and deliberations on those, and see how we can codify those so that they can become right away part of the municipal code, just like you have the C2 zone or R1 zone. When you have an R1 zone, that means you can put that parcel, nothing but single family and vice versa. So we need to codify those things. I would not want to spend any more energy. You're right, South LA, South Central has been studied in the Christopher Commission, and tons of reports are there. I think we need to codify those.
And can you share more about, so who can help community members codify that? Obviously the intention is there, but you need that technical advice. So is there a specific type, like what profession do we have to enlist in order for that code to be?
Yeah.
Give us all the sauce right now. Give us all the secrets so we infiltrate.
No, actually, the planning department and the director is committed to doing this. And when I'm speaking, honestly speaking, I'm speaking on behalf of some of the things that we like to do officially. It's no longer running away from the people who have been harmed. I think stop the harm and then move to the planning. That's where we are. And the whole point of atonement is to say the planning department has been wrong. I'm not afraid to say that. We like to change some of the things we do. So we can collaborate on that, but if I just give you a quick example of how we did the fast food ordinance, which became the basis for the healthy chapter. And I agree with Martha, a lot of the things we do in the past were watered down. The fast food ordinance was stronger than what you have now, but it was watered down by two previous South LA and Watts council members. They literally watered down because the Restaurant Association, California Restaurant Association pressured them. And that happened. The way you do is we need city council members to endorse these ideas and introduce motions. Once they do the motion, they will collaborate with us, or that program, environmental justice checklist, will be forwarded to the planning department to codify it. I think we can do that. As late as yesterday, Councilman Rue introduced a new motion called Affordable Housing Enterprise, something I haven't read the thing, but it's one of the first that's saying create some enterprise zones for affordable housing as part of the racial justice movement. So I think we can have that conversation sometime in the future, but it takes three ways. It takes us as the planning department, you as the constituents and people who are speaking on behalf of the residents of that area, and the council office introducing the motion is what they hear from the people to introduce that in the form of motion and instruct legitimate departments to work on those as part of their work program.
Got it. Thank you for that. So before we move on to ask the questions that are on our chat box, I want to give Eunices an opportunity to answer that question. So what are the conversations we need to be having about equity right now?
I think that's two pieces. The first piece is that anything we do that is going to be impactful to community, that conversation around racial equity needs to be at the forefront from the beginning. With the alternatives to incarceration piece, during our process, we actually included a a process for all the recommendations to pass through a racial equity analysis to figure out which communities it would most impact, and also where we would need to invest in these services the most. So I would, and we brought that up because we know the disparities in the criminal justice system or injustice system. And so we made sure that we try to bring it at the forefront. So it was in racial equity, and that lens was included in the whole ATI process. And so that's one piece. And then I think also it's about investing in those communities to reclaim land that has been taken from them. So in South LA, there's an organization, an amazing organization, the Youth Justice Coalition, that actually took over in partnership with LA County, old probation courthouse that was closed. And so what they did was that they took over it, they made it into a free high school. Part of the spaces, like for community-based organizations, there's a garden, they have events there for the young people. And so that's just an example of, like, yes, in these spaces where these institutions have claimed land, like, let's claim that land back and have it, you know, benefit the community that's around them. And it's interesting because in that building, you'll still see the 2 courtrooms where the judges used to sentence young people to prison and jail. And there's still cells in the back of the building where they used to be incarcerated, and people who are part of our coalition and leading the work have actually been, you know, through those courtrooms and incarcerated in those jail cells in the back. And if I could just add to this idea of, like, how community creates, like, more space and, like, space that they can enjoy. Justice LA is working with a nonprofit called Designing Justice and Designing Spaces. They're an architectural nonprofit that has worked across the country to really, like, for example, in Atlanta, they saw the women's jail. They're working with the Atlanta city to reimagine what could be on the land where the women's jail sits on. So is it that they, you know, take it down and build up something for community, or do they just clear it out and still, you know, give it to community? So there's different options, and we're working with Designing Justice and Designing Spaces here in LA County to figure out where we could pilot something that is an alternative to incarceration. One of the biggest pieces of actually developing not only this architectural example in partnership with the county, but also, like, it's informed by community engagement. And so whatever property we look at for the pilot, there's going to be a community engagement for the community to say, well, I would love to see housing here. I would love to see daycare here. I would love to see a job resource center. So from that community engagement, then DJDS will actually, you know, whatever the architectural example that they put together will include whatever the community would like to see. And sometimes I mean, we're doing this work because what we've come across is, no offense to the bureaucracy, but it's not very imaginative or creative. Like, sometimes it can't think outside the box. It can't imagine what a process like around community engagement like this could look like. And so we have heavily invested in that so that we could actually put this architectural example together. And I'm really excited about it. We just got this off the ground, and hopefully, you know, in the next 18 months, we'll actually have, you know, maybe what it could look like if we build community resources where Men's Central Jail currently lands, or what it could look like if, you know, we go in South LA and take over a huge plot of, like, empty land. Like, what would that look like? So I think we have to also invest in those spaces, because sometimes the bureaucracy and the systems don't have the creativity to make it happen. So it falls on us.
Can I jump in? Just okay. You know what Ulises was talking about is so exciting. We're doing a project where we're working with researchers and folks, experts in land remediation, and developing a toolkit for communities on what are the best ways to actually begin cleaning soil, right? Because right now we dig and we haul it and we burn it in another low-income community. So, you know, these intersections of our work are just really exciting, because to reclaim land, we actually have to restore that land, particularly in South LA with its industrial past. And we're talking to folks in Texas, Latinos who are doing biomimicry, which is, you know, natural ways of producing things. So it's, you know, yeah, our job is to bring the best and newest ideas and have as tools for communities.
Okay, here we go. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Sorry, my
Yes.
headphones were acting up. I apologize for that. Faisal, I know you have to sign off in just a few minutes for a city council meeting. But want to ask you a question on behalf of one of our guests. This comes from Jacqueline Barrios, who's a teacher in South LA. And the question that she asks is, if you can share the importance of representing and recreating urban imaginaries through stories and narratives in your experience. And then she asks a second part to that question about how you go about documenting harm and disparity without reinscribing stereotypes or pandering to dominant imaginaries about South LA.
Yeah, I think the story map for communities has been one of the latest arts that planners are using. So our GIS office usually helps. I think we started some years ago, and we can do that, given the message coming mainly from the public. I think to the second part of your question or inquiry, I honestly believe, and this is uncharted waters, but the only person who can create the true narrative and images of a given community is the community itself. I mean, somebody who come from Boston, got a job in Los Angeles and has been in the office for 2-3 years and sent to South LA and East LA and told, create some reimagining of that community, most likely an Anglo person, it's gonna be impossible. So I think one of the reasons why I like to put extra emphasis on the element of the mayor's action plan that he submitted that calls for collaboration and cooperation with community-based organizations and groups is the fact that I'm a believer that they know the true story of their community. They know more than I do, despite my 30 years. They know their story more than the mayor's office or anybody. So I think if we want to capture the true spirit of what that community wants without disparaging its history or its community. And as a minority planner, we always face this, where somebody tries to talk about, you know, the Black experience or the Latinx experience, or for that matter, indigenous. They will come from good part, but they will go off tangent, or they will say something that somebody long time ago told them, and they still hold that to be true. So I think as we grow to move to collaborate with, you know, social groups and community-based organization groups, my intent is to ask them to define themselves. Planning has a long tradition, unless it's abused, to get the mission and vision of each and every community from that community itself. I think usually bureaucrats take that with their smart, you know, thinking, and think that they can listen to you for 2 minutes and then take and reimagine your own society. And often the product is different than what the community told. In terms of really the last issue that Eunice was talking about, I participated at a panel discussion last Friday by David Salazar, who has been a planner for a long time ago and then taught at the community colleges. And he was proposing, and he was just testing his ideas, but he was proposing to create the first, what you call, community design center or an institute for Long Beach. I think he was trying to answer to the issue that Eunice has raised in the form of planning. Often when we meet with the community groups, like, you know, your group or another group, we send sophisticated planners who include urban planners, designers, GIS people, and public relation officers, and say, go and talk to that community. The community residents who often come from a long day work, toiling there, you know, come there, they know something is happening to their neighborhood, but they really don't know how to articulate the issues that's burning. That's, you know, they don't know how to speak what we call restorative planning, somebody to interpret what is on the table. So an institute like that, you know, and Dave Salazar, I think, was also associated with the trade tech for a while. A design center that's part and parcel of that community that really speaks about architectural issues, design issues, but as an agent for the community, in my opinion, is a timely needed so that our urban design, my urban design that is highly expert and nuanced on when it comes to design, street designing, landscape designing, all that, needs a counterpart from the community that takes your ideas and translates into architectural and design format and literally negotiates with us and say, this is what the community wants. So I think, we have a long way to go, but as I said, we are ready to collaborate and cooperate with you guys. I think I have a sense that the time is here. It's up to us to lose that time. And from my side, your side, everybody's side, that inflection period is an opportunity period we need to seize.
Well, thank you so much. I know you have to sign off, but before you do, I just want to thank you for your time and your wisdom and for being an ally of the community and the role that you play. So thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us.
Thank you, Emma. I really appreciate it.
Good luck on your meeting.
Thank you very much.
All right.
See you. Bye-bye.
We're going to continue, and I'm going to ask a question that was in our chat box that I think it's very provocative, but also it's one that for many of us, it's been our life journey to talk about Black-Brown unity, and the work that we've invested in has been around bringing both communities together despite being pitted against one another. So this guest asked this question that's, and places it very eloquently. So South LA has struggled with Black and Brown unity. And so how do we go about addressing these historical challenges that our communities have often grappled with because we are pitted against one another? So the question is, how can we redefine or reimagine this conflict so people of color can benefit from the same healthy community implementations that are being discussed here today? So Martha, I'm gonna ask you to take us away on this question.
Man, right? This is organizing when I was in high school around Black and Brown unity. So it's been a lifelong challenge to see. So I think we need to do a lot of different things, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but I will talk about, in South LA right now, we are actually the South LA Building Healthy Communities is specifically looking at this, right? We're looking at this issue. We're also looking at how anti-Blackness shows up in our work. And there's a curriculum that's being developed that's pretty profound in our ability to talk to, so that we can begin to have these conversations within our communities. And I just think having the conversations and being able to understand how our issues are framed. And so, for example, and I think a lot more has to be talked about in South LA, right? Everything from how we as nonprofits operate and grow and are part of the issue, and then how do those of us who are doing base building and working with our organizations work with our members to be able to struggle through this and in a loving way so that we are actually building unity. And I think, the issue of displacement and how do you protect the Black community, the folks who are still here, who haven't been displaced and gentrified out, that's part of the conversation. How we collaborate or compete for resources is also part of the conversation. And I know that that's not an answer, but I think it's a process. And talking about it, unpacking our own stuff that we bring to the table is part of it. And then moving beyond competition is a really and competition is embedded in everything we do as part of our economy, right? So.
Thank you. Onisis, you want to share your perspective on Black and Brown unity?
Yeah, so I'll share from my perspective, but also South LA should get the resources, then South LA should speak for those struggles, right? I think the Black and brown struggle differs from, what communities we're actually talking about. So I think it even needs to go down to that level of, like, in South LA, when we work with Youth Justice Coalition, there's actually folks in the community who have been community leaders for a long time that help when there's when they just went into the space and there was some tension with, going into a new space, different gangs who are in that area. And so the community leaders who are always on the ground were leading those conversations and made it into a neutral zone. So I think more of folks, if you're not from those areas and those struggles, then how do we get resources so that that community can have that conversation where, it might be a struggle, but it's not a harmful conversation and people grow from it.
Right.
And I think it has to be not only tailored to the language, but culturally humble to even the smallest cities and neighborhoods you're in, because it varies. I can only speak for myself when I say that anti-Blackness is real in the Latino community, 100%. And we have a responsibility to break it down, even if it's over the table around food on whatever holidays you're together, or even in regular days, especially with all this news coming out and people blaming folks for getting harmed by state-sanctioned violence, not realizing the systemic racism of the entire system. So it really is our responsibility to help build those bridges, because we are impacted. But if you look at the data, if you look at the stories and the people, there are certain communities whose houses are literally on fire, and I think oftentimes we don't take a step back because we're so. We're also struggling with a lot, but I think it's how do we come to the table to acknowledge, look, these are the things that exist because of systemic racism. Black folks are getting killed at more disproportionate rates and incarcerated at a higher rate. How do we come through and support that community? But also, how do the needs of the brown community also get uplifted to where folks don't feel ignored? But I really think that it's about investing in those communities to have those conversations, but in a healing way.
Yep.
We have a follow-up to that, because it's not just about unity, but we have Kelvin Sauls who jumped on the chat box to ask, how do we move from beyond just unity to working in solidarity? And I will add co-conspirators, which is the word that a lot of people are using today to talk about this very important solidarity work. So if there's anything that you would want to add about that.
Yeah, so I think personal level, that's always a place to start, because you can control that. You're the one who controls your personal space and who's around you, and cutting it out in that space, which is very difficult, especially when loved ones don't understand the entire work that you're in. So I think it's taking time to do in your personal space, but also when we think about when we're fighting for folks, I think it's often, and it doesn't matter what sector of the work you're in. I'm in CJ, but there's folks working in housing, folks working on programming. I think it's also uplifting how the disparities are right in front of us in those spaces at every moment, in front of funders, in front of the bureaucracy, because the information is there. There is no other clear pathway, but these communities are getting most harmed. So it is about, one, incorporating it in your personal life, incorporating in the advocacy that you're doing, and uplifting the disparities, and checking the bureaucratic systems from the get-go around using racial equity lens throughout whatever policy or program they're working on, and not have it be something that they come up on the end. Okay, we're gonna do a racial equity training, boom, that's it. It's no, it has to be very intentional. And it's been a journey for myself. It's been a journey for others that I know. And sometimes it's not easy because you're going to get a lot of pushback, especially from your loved ones. I think it's a little bit easier to check it when you're in like professional spaces, because it's harmful, but your family's going to tell you what's up, and they might not be right. So that's all I would add, that it's hard. It's a journey process, but the more that you do it, the more people become aware, and the more that you dismantle it. And in that, help build the political power of Black and brown people. Because you're right, it's not just about unity, but we have power through voting and through making public comments and other things. So that's what I would add.
Marta, anything else you want to add?
I yes to everything Lisa just said, and also, something I've been thinking about. I was so pissed at Spanish language media I've been pissed with them, right? And I think at some point we need to demand that they do better about how they are framing issues, right? because we were hearing in Latino communities, oh, the looting, and it's like, well, then I'm like, why? Yes, I know that our community can be racist, right? But I thought, well, where a lot of this is coming, how the media was framing the issue and not explaining and not doing a good job of helping people understand these issues, right? So we need to demand as consumers of their product, sorry to speak in those capitalistic terms, that they do better, right? So that may be work we can do collectively between Black and brown communities and saying, you need to do better. So, yeah.
And I know that I'm the moderator, but I would love to add to this, that I do think it starts with our own, addressing our own internal anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenous mentality that we were raised with, and then to challenge our own family members, to be okay being uncomfortable, challenging our family members when they say stuff that's racist or inaccurate. Because what I tend to encounter, especially in circles with friends and family, is how often the perspective of Black America is distorted to fit whatever stereotypes that individual has, but they completely ignore all the contributions that Black people have made directly and indirectly for us as a people, and continue to make it. I mean, a lot of the advocacy that is happening today is a direct response of Black people speaking up for respect and humanity, and brown people closely following behind, or using that as the model that, you know, that many of our folks are using to elevate our own humanity and desire for social justice. And that is what I find myself doing most often, is reminding my friends and family of those contributions, and you know, and moving the conversation away from one that just focuses on their own toxic and inaccurate perceptions of Black America as a whole. So we have one more question before we close it out. I just want to end on a positive note, and I'll start with Marta, with you first. If you can tell us, this comes directly from the chat box, so I want to give credit to the anonymous attendee who asked this of you today. What changes are you hoping will be implemented in 2021 that have the promise of creating a healthier South Los Angeles? What a beautiful question.
Yep. I was actually typing away an answer to that person right now. So specifically, we're working on several things that we think we hope and will fight and continue to work to make sure that they result in a healthier South LA. Is that we have been fighting for a number of years to have South Los Angeles selected as a community that will get an air improvement plan as part of AB 617, which is a climate bill that addressed air pollution. And we kept getting ignored. The program has got forces communities to compete with each other. But yet, finally this year, we had over 200 letters from all the electeds in South LA to the South Coast to demand that South LA be selected. It looks like they're going to recommend that they be selected. And of course, because, you know, racism and we can't have nice things, there's less money in the budget for South LA. And so we've been fighting for years for air quality improvements. So we're also going to end up having to fight for more resources for South LA. So that's one very concrete, and it's a broadly defined area of South LA so that we don't exclude African-American communities, and we don't exclude some of the bigger polluters in that area. And then the second thing is the Climate Emergency Mobilization Department, where the Frontline Commission is going to be placed, and it'll be an opportunity for folks who are progressive, who are from frontline communities, to be on that commission. And we hope that we'll, by the end of 2021, we will begin to see policies that are actually centered on frontline communities to reduce what we call is to detoxify, decarbonize, and democratize the city of LA's just transition.
All right, Eunices.
So 2021, that is right around the corner. It feels like, right? I would really hope that in 2021, that we would have the ability to have this bucket of funds where we can invest in all the things that, you know, will help our communities thrive. Sometimes, especially in this work, it takes a long time for things to happen, right? But we've been building so much in the last few years that, you know, 2021 for a lot of our work actually means implementation. And so implementation means that, you know, when you call 911, there's psychiatric mobile response teams that will come to your house instead of police officers. What it means is that if you're having a behavioral health issue, that hopefully there's access, more access than there already exists. But also what I hope is that we see a lesser percentage of people who are houseless. I hope to see more people have access to like employment, but that's employment that's going to help them sustain and thrive. Martha said something really important that I want to uplift and just say in a little bit of a different way. You know, the status quo before COVID-19, none of us were thriving. All of us were barely surviving. And then COVID-19 hit, right? And so we have to do better, and we have to demand for the whole pie instead of just a piece of the pie, because they're always going to try to compromise with us. So my hope is that in 2021, we were better than what we were in 2019. And I know that seems like foolish to think about because of the fiscal uncertainty, but I just know from all the work that's happening on the ground, especially locally, if we keep pushing, we have the opportunity to really, you know, make our communities much healthier and much more sustainable and, you know, together instead of, you know, torn apart through these different institutions and systems. We can do it. We're doing it. It's going to happen. I have no doubt.
That was beautifully stated. So we want to thank you all for joining our discussion today and for showing an interest in learning how we can play a role in not only reclaiming, but also reimagining and redefining what a healthy South Central looks like. Please make sure you visit the South LA is Future website and check out our South Central Rooted report, where you can get a lot more information. It's a beautiful piece with a lot of great imagery, a lot of great data that you can use. And if you're into listening to podcasts, make sure that you check out the podcast that is already out, as well as the 2 previous webinars. This is the 3rd part of a 3-part series that we launched at the onset of COVID. And so we want to thank you all for joining us. Please continue to check out the website for stories from the South LA Building Healthy Communities Collective. And there's more information that you can access on the website. At the end of this learning session, there is going to be a survey that we're asking all of you to fill out, so you can give us feedback as to how you enjoyed this series, but also what else needs to happen as we take the talking that you heard in this series and we turn it into action for a better South LA. We hope you all stay safe and healthy. Make sure you hug the loved ones that are around you, and you remind them that they matter to you, because in this world where it seems like everything is upside down, what we have is most precious is our health and the health of those around us. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and we hope to be in touch.